Hi everybody, welcome to a special edition of Value Wagering. Today I'm going to talk about the 2012 Belmont Stakes and I'll Have Another's historic quest to become the first Triple Crown winner since affirmed in 1978. Of course, the Triple Crown comprised of the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness Stakes, and the Belmont Stakes. Now, the first thing I think of when I think of the Belmont Stakes is the pace. And I know to some of you that might be kind of surprising given the fact that it's a 12-furlong race, that's a mile and a half. You would think, you know, just the horse that's closing the fastest is the horse that you want to play. Not necessarily true. In fact, in the history of the Triple Crown, only one Triple Crown winner has won the Belmont Stakes after being more than 5 lengths off the pace at the first call, and that was Assault. And if you look at the recent history of the Belmont Stakes, whether a Triple Crown is on the line or not, you're still seeing that emphasis on early speed. You've got the Tara, who went wire to wire. Commendable went wire to wire. Ruler on Ice just last year was never worse than second. So early pace really does count. Let's take a look at the horses this year that I think will be near the early pace and off the early pace. Now, first of all, it should be noted that as I'm shooting this video, I don't know what the final Belmont field is, nor do I know post position or any of that kind of thing. But I've grouped the contenders, the likely contenders, into categories. The green category is kind of the go category. These are your early speed runners. The second category is the presser category, the horses that are going to be just off the pace. That is in yellow. And the red category is the horses, or is comprised of the horses that are going to be coming off the pace. And I really think that in that red category, you've got to be very, very careful, because these are horses that are probably not going to be anywhere near the early lead. And one of the reasons that the early lead, or being close to the early lead, is so important in the Belmont Stakes is because typically the pace is not as fast. Now, using my early speed rations, that's my own measurement of early energy disbursement, and the lower the figure, the better, the average ESR in the Belmont Stakes over the last 20 years is a -4. Now, contrast that to the Kentucky Derby, which is a -10. Let's take a look at some individual horses, and we'll start with Atagun. Atagun ran a pretty good race on the undercard on Kentucky Derby Day. He won an optional claiming event, and we've got the stretch call of that race, and you'll see it was a pretty impressive race. 0 LSR. Again, the LSRs are my late speed rations. That's a measurement of late energy disbursement. The higher the better in that case, and the 0 LSR was considerably better than the LSR that I'll Have Another recorded in the Kentucky Derby, albeit there was a much, much faster pace in the Derby. But take a look at Atagun's last race on the Kentucky Derby.
Has made a huge move to take the lead. He goes on now with a furlong and a half ahead of them. Politically Correct is in second. Slam It to the Inside is in third. Ford is back in fourth, racing down towards the final 16th. Atagun is out in front by a length and a half. Politically Correct tries to come back, but from last to first to winner's circle, Atagun wins the Derby.
Next, we're going to look at a couple of horses, Dullahan and Union Rags, both of whom surprised in the Kentucky Derby, which was their last race. Dullahan because he finished well, and Union Rags because he didn't finish so well. Both are also similar in that they don't have a lot of early speed. Now, Union Rags has more tactical speed, but he's been running awfully slow early. The Florida Derby had a slow pace. The Kentucky Derby had a fast pace, but of course, Union Rags was far off that pace. And if you look at the history of the Belmont Stakes since 1992, only 3 horses have won the Test of Champions coming into the race with average ESRs of 0 or greater. And those 3 were Jazeel, Editor's Note, and Summer Bird. Both Dullahan and Union Rags have average ESRs of 0 or greater. So that's knock number 1. Now, can they win the Belmont Stakes from a talent standpoint? Certainly. Take a look at the Kentucky Derby, and you be the judge.
Furlong, and it is Bodemeister and Mike Smith out in front. I'll Have Another, and Mario Gutierrez now come alongside. Dullahan still has a chance, and then Creative Cause. I'll Have Another takes the lead in the Derby, and up to line. I'll Have Another wins the Derby, a first winning ride for Mario Gutierrez. It was I'll Have Another for Doug O'Neill and 25-year-old Mario Gutierrez, who took Derby.
Now we come to I'll Have Another, the Preakness and Derby winner, and really there's not a lot to say. In terms of talent, yes, he's got a ton of talent. In terms of figures, yeah, he's got those too. Really, to me, the idea of analyzing a race is to always look for value. And as I've said many, many times before, if you want validation for how good a favorite is, just look at the tote board. And I'll Have Another is likely to be 4 to 5 or 3 to 5, almost definitely going to be odds on. So that tells us all we need to know about his talent. The purpose here, the purpose of this video, and really what I try to do as a bettor, is look for potential weaknesses. And there are a few with I'll Have Another. Let's start with the quality of that Preakness field, which I don't think was really there. As I talked about in my column a couple weeks ago, the new shooters, the horses that didn't compete in the Kentucky Derby, were pretty weak. And if you look at the key race rating, that's something I came up with in a TwinSpires column a while back, and you can check the archives at twinspires.com for that column. But the key race rating measures the relative ability of the horses in the field, or at least at that time. And ratings less than 3 are pretty weak. A 2.8 last time in the Preakness for I'll Have Another. That's the weakest since Bernardini. So just something to watch for. It wasn't really a stellar field in Maryland last time. Now, the other thing about I'll Have Another is that no Triple Crown winner has ever not been favored in the Preakness Stakes. And you might think, well, what difference does that make? Well, generally, we're looking for horses that showed ability early, precocious types that then improved. That's how you become great. You know, it's the person that is talented early and then becomes even better that typically becomes great, as opposed to somebody who was terrible doing something and then improved over their lifetime. Obviously, folks like that can and do succeed all the time, but in terms of horse racing, in terms of looking for the great horses, it really does pay to look for early talent. It's a minor factor to be sure. The next horse I want to talk about is a horse that I think has a big shot of upsetting the Big Apple cart, and that is Painter. Now, it's kind of ironic because Painter is trained by Bob Baffert, who, of course, trained Bodemeister, who was second to I'll Have Another in both the Preakness and the Belmont Stakes. But make no mistake, this is no second stringer. First of all, it's owned, Painter is, by Zayat Stables, which has had some great horses in the past. And the thing that really opened my eyes about this horse was his last race. It was on the Preakness Stakes undercard, and the pace figures that he recorded were actually better than those recorded by I'll Have Another in the Preakness Stakes. Now, this is reminiscent of the Tara, who also ran on the Preakness undercard the day that Big Brown won the Preakness Stakes, and his figures were better than Big Brown's. And it's significant. A -6 LSR for I'll Have Another in the Preakness Stakes this year, a -1 for Painter. Now, I know if you look at the past performances, you might think, well, yeah, but Painter was on an easy lead, and that's why he ran the big figures. Yeah, that's probably part of it. But remember, I think he can probably get the lead today and probably get an easy lead today, at least in terms of effort. He might be pressured a little bit, but he was pressured last time. Secondly, Painter doesn't really need the early lead. In fact, in the second start of his career, mind you, coming off of his debut at 5.5 furlongs, he competed in the Santa Anita Derby against I'll Have Another and was only beaten 3.5 lengths. Now, granted, I'll Have Another has improved a ton since then, but I think Painter has too, as evidenced by the ascending speed figures and also by the pace figures I was just talking about. Take a look at his last race and see if you agree.
Away under a vigorous hand ride by Mike Smith. Painter's won the 9 and coming to the Pimlico line. Painter, Brimstone Island ran a huge one second. Painter by 5, Brimstone Island, Respectful Ed.
I ran a win factor report. The win factor report is my computerized fair odds line for the Belmont Stakes. And not surprisingly, I'll Have Another is the top choice, but he's 7-5 on my win factor line. I also produced my own line. I put I'll Have Another fair odds at 4-5. And I will say that the Belmont Stakes, more than any of the other Triple Crown races, is very sensitive to value. In fact, if you just bet overlays on the morning line over the past 10 years in the Belmont Stakes, you'd be up over 200%. So it really does pay to come up with your own odds line and only bet the overlays. And given that, I just don't see I'll Have Another being an overlay. Now, I think he can be used in exotics, but if you're looking for a win bet, take a look at Painter, who is not only second on my win factor line, but I really like him having handicapped the race. 9-1 on my win factor line. I think 8-1 is fair, maybe even a little bit lower than that. I definitely think he's the one to beat past I'll Have Another in the Belmont Stakes. Union Rag's another one that you can consider. 9-1 on my win factor fair odds line. I don't know if you're going to see that on Belmont Day, but if you do, he might be worth a deuce or two. Dullahan is 5-1 on the morning line. He's the second choice, but he's 12-1 on my win factor line, and I actually think he's 12-1. That was my own personal line as well. I just don't like the late closing style. I still think that he's probably more of a turf or all-weather horse. And so I would insist on big odds on Dullahan because I think he's going to be the logical alternative. He's the closing horse. He's going to be the horse that a lot of people are going to pick in lieu of I'll Have Another. So I think he too could be an underlay. And of course you see the rest of the odds there. In terms of exactas, I would be using Painter and I'll Have Another in the first and second slots, actually in terms of exactas and trifectas, and then fill out the rest of the ticket with horses that are also offering value. Anyway, that is my look at the 2012 Belmont Stakes. You can get more videos at valuewagering.com. You can also go to twinspires.com, read my columns, read all the other great columns up there as well. And of course, you can do all your betting at Twin Spires. It's like a one-stop shop. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again somewhere down the road.